Welcome, sports fans, to the Week 14 Steel Scorpion Sports Podcast. Live from San Diego, I'm Jeff Miller.
And from San Jose, I'm Mike Eflin.
All right, Mark. As always, why don't we start off the podcast with our weekly adventure to Las Vegas. So give us the results of our gambling aficionado performance.
All right, so in Week 14, same as in Week 13, the favorites were 8-8. So I guess you could also say the underdogs were 8-8. So once again, Vegas kind of on top of their game. And year to date, the favorites are now 100 up, 102 down, and 4 pushes. And 2 games that went off as a pickup, so are not included in the total. And then in Week 14, the overs were 6 and 10, so we have a lot of unders. And for the year-to-date now, overs are 104, 102, and 2. So both numbers pretty much right at 500. A few of the interesting gambling notes from the weekend. The Vikings ended up as 4-point favorites, went to overtime. Now, I don't have the exact stats, but normally when a game goes to overtime, you figure it's probably going to be settled by a field goal. So you're figuring even if the Vikings win, they're going to win by 3, and so if you happen to have Vikings -4, you're not going to cover. However, they had a miracle play to Jarius Wright where he took a very short pass and then basically ran 86 yards back for the touchdown. So if you happen to have the Vikings -4, you were very happy. However, if you had the Jets +4, you were extremely unhappy with that result because, as I said, probably figured you were safe at that point. Another one was the Bills and the Broncos. Those went off as 9.5-point favorites. They were covering for most of that game. Gave up some late touchdowns, including a late touchdown to Buffalo with about a minute versus the over under 50.5. So some interesting results there.
Yeah, and it's crazy with the Jets and Broncos, as you said there. The Jets were covering that game the entire time. They ran out to a lead. They got a safety early, a touchdown. They actually had the lead the whole time. So you had to feel pretty good if you had the Jets. And as you said, even when the Vikings come back and take it to overtime, you still feel like you're going to win right up until the Jets do what only the Jets can do, and they give up a touchdown to break your heart. And the Broncos, the same thing. I mean, the whole game you felt comfortable that they were up double digits. You felt pretty good, and then they give up the backdoor cover, as we call it. Oh, the agony of that. But good for the Bills for trying. I think there was another interesting tidbit of the year of the underdog, as we've heard this referred to, Mark. So you now say that the underdogs are 2 whole games up on the favorites for the year?
Yeah, 2 whole games. So
that's impressive.
Again, not nearly difficult the year of the underdog, and I'm pretty sure nothing is going to be enough of a swing in the last 3 weeks to change that.
All right, so interesting tidbits coming out of Vegas. But also, I think you have some other
gambling-related notes, I guess you could say. So, took a weekend trip, put up with some buddies from when I used to live in Texas, and so flew to Dallas on Friday. And then went to, I don't know if you know this, but it's at least they build themselves as, the world's largest casino. And after being there, believe it. Now, I've been there before. When I saw it there 6 years ago, and they've expanded the crap out of this place. But it's called WinStar Casino in Thackerville, Oklahoma, which is exit 1. So if you drive from Dallas, and then where did you pop over the border of Oklahoma? Exit 1 is Thackerville. And there's this huge casino, and it is gigantic. And when they say World's Casino, I believe them because I think it's like an actual casino floor space, not, including hotel rooms and all that. Because there's a hotel there, but it's not huge. But the casino floor space is just, it goes for ever. Like, I think I took a mile walk from my room to get back to the poker room, which is on the very far end of the casino. But just a little known fact for you that the world's largest casino somehow is in a tiny town in Oklahoma. But then again, it's Thackerville, so there's nothing there. So they have tons and tons of real estate to just keep expanding and keep their title with. couple of interesting poker hands that I'll go over real quickly. Now, probably have heard, once you rack your chips, you should not play a hand. So Saturday night, we're playing late into the night. It's 4:30 in the morning. Had a winning session. I put all my chips in the rack, and dealer was about to deal. I'm like, okay, I'll take one more hand. I look down, it's pocket aces. Now, I completely missed the should just raise to 100 and just win the blinds and then take my chips and be done. Or I should have just limped in, and then if someone had raised it, 15 or 20 or something, then I could have popped it to, 100 or 200 and actually got a little bit more money from it. And if everyone just went in and no one raised, I could have just folded on the flop and be willing to lose $3. Instead, I raised to 15. I get 3 callers. The flop comes 9-7-5, and I ended up getting it all the way to the flop against the guy that had a stack of about 400. And he had called my raise with 9-5 offsuit. So he flopped 2 pair. I didn't improve. Lost the hand. Very disappointed in myself. And then the other interesting hand was playing that table with my friends, and got it all in. There was a hand. It was ace of spades, 4 spades, king of clubs on the flop. Raised back and forth, got it all in against my buddy. He ended up having king of spades, queen of spades for pair of kings, and the nut flush draw. I thought I was good. I had 5 of spades, 3 of spades. So I had a flush draw that turned out to be no good, and I had a gut shot straight draw, meaning a deuce, and deuce of spades, giving me a straight flush. Turns out I was 18% favorite to win the hand, and I didn't hit the straight, but I hit running 5. So it came 5 of diamonds on the turn, 5 of hearts on the river, and I won with chip 5. And needless to say, my friend was not too happy, and we ended up discussing that hand for the rest of the trip. But it's one of the best or worst bad beats that I've ever put on somebody.
Yeah, typically when you tell that story, for those that don't know Mark well, that story ends up with Mark on the other side of that, where you're sitting there with a great hand, you're in the right position, you've played it well, and some guy calls with some ridiculous hand, and yet he catches runner to make you get up from the table, turn red, scream, throw things, look like Phil Hellmuth. So that's usually the way that story ends. So I'm
great for some high comedy. He was quite frustrated. He took it fairly well, other than calling me a major donkey and the worst player that I'd ever seen. But he was mostly joking, I hope. But yeah, that was a quite interesting hand.
All right, well, very nice. And I take it you drove up I-35 straight up out of Dallas, and as soon as you cross the Oklahoma border, there you are?
That is exactly true. And I landed in around lunchtime, and I figured, you know what, I haven't had Whataburger in like 6 years, so I wanted a Whataburger. So, which, if anyone who's not from the South and Texas doesn't know, it's like the McDonald's, basically. It's a hamburger joint, but it's really good at it.
No. I would beg to differ that it's not like a McDonald's, and I'd actually compare more to like a Carl's Jr. for those out west, or a Hardee's for those in the Midwest, except for the food isn't great and the burgers are really greasy. So awesome choice, Mark.
Well, I just meant like McDonald's as far as just letting, it's a fast food hamburger place, but to me it's better, and to me it's better than what you're serving it, because I think they're real good food. Anyway, I was craving it, having not had it for 6 years, and so I'm driving along, I finally see an exit sign that has the Whataburger sign. And in Texas, of course, not normal exits that you're used to across most of the country. They've got these weird frontage roads that basically just run parallel to the interstate for everyone ever. Anyway, getting 7-Eleven pizza for my snack, so I was quite disappointed. But
wow, that is a great story. Very proud of you for skipping Whataburger, or as some of us refer to it, What's a Burger, and getting 7-Eleven pizza, which might even be worse. So kudos to you.
Yeah, the 7-Eleven pizza wasn't what I was looking for, but surprisingly, not as bad as I thought. I was actually pleasantly surprised. But one more quick note. So while I was at the casino, they had, poker magazines sitting around, and so I grabbed one. So I got picked up the November-December issue of All In magazine. It's mostly filled with poker articles, as you might imagine. But then towards the back, there's a fantasy sports section, and then an article, Lessons of the Fall. And within this article, there's a little sidebar called Finders Keepers. And it says, In a keeper league, the top guys at each position to hold on to. Now, between these four positions, the choices mostly make sense. For quarterback, and this gives three of each position. For quarterback, they say Luck, Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers. Definitely can't argue with Luck or Rodgers. Manning is older, but they make a joke. They say he's 38, but he's also a robot from the future. But then I would just bring it up. You could see, at least in the keeper league for one more year, you could get a good year out of him. For tight end, the choices are obvious. They get it right. They say Graham, Gronkowski, Julius Thomas. No problems there. Wide receiver, they say Megatron, Antonio Brown, Demarius Thomas. Can't argue with that too much. Megatron's getting a little bit older. You could make an argument for maybe someone like Julio Jones, but for the most part, that's close enough. For running back, you're thinking you'll see names like maybe Le'Veon Bell, LaShawn McCoy, Jamal Charles, Eddie Lacy, some of these good young backs. The top three they list for running back, for one, they say Adrian Peterson, who's going to be, I think, 30 next year, hasn't played in a year. For number two, they say Matt Forte, having a pretty good year, but again, approaching 30. Get DeMarco Murray is another name that I should have mentioned in that list. No, they don't list him either. And you'll never guess who picked number three. I could give you 20 guesses. You probably wouldn't get it. At number three, they say Mark Ingram. And it says elite talent, elite offense, one caveat, injuries. What in the world is a running back list?
That is odd. One, Mark Ingram is injured all the time, so that one caveat is kind of big. Two, they called it an elite offense in New Orleans, and I don't know if they've actually watched any games this year. Now, obviously, that was the November-December issue. They probably put it out weeks before, but even the first half of this season, I don't recall New Orleans offense being elite, which is why they're now in such a hole record-wise. It's been good at times, but yeah, that's a strange concept that you would throw Mark Ingram in there, knowing that for 3 years in the league, he's pretty much done nothing, and he finally has a good year, and you're going to call him one of the top three keepers. Seems strange.
Yeah, not only just have Ingram in there, which is really, really strange, but how do you not have Bell or Murray or Charles or Lacy? They completely whiffed on the running back position.
Maybe they were just trying to get discussion, and if so, good job, All In Magazine. You got us to talk about you.
Sure enough.
So that is interesting in a negative way, but good for them. They did an article on Fantasy Sports, at least. Week 14 mark, because I wanted to touch on a few of the interesting games that happened over the week. A lot of playoff scenarios are starting to close down on teams. The picture is becoming a little more clear. I'd say the AFC cleared up a little bit this week. The NFC has been semi-clear for a while. Now I think it's a little more clear, with one team in particular falling out. We'll talk about in a moment. And I would like to also mention that the NFC South has really done us favors. We had the teams that were contenders for the crown both losing this week and allowing the Panthers back into the race and guaranteeing basically that you're going to have a losing record win that division. I don't think it's mathematically locked up yet, but seeing how those teams play, you have teams sitting with the Saints and Falcons on 8 losses, the Panthers on 8, but with a tie, so they can't even get to a winning record. It's just terribly impressive watching the NFC South. Although I will say I was saddened to hear the Bucs have been mathematically eliminated.
It's about time. It's pretty sad that they had 2 wins and weren't that we're still alive until week 14. But yeah, I saw that with Falcons losing tonight to the Packers, they're now 5-8. The Saints are 5-8. Like you said, the Panthers are 4-8-1. So the very best a team could finish 8-8 and win that division. I'm hoping, as I mentioned before, I hope that division winner ends up as bad as possible. I wish it could be 5-11, but I've looked at the schedules and some of those teams play each other, so unfortunately that's not possible. But I think it still is possible for a team to win that division at 6-10, which is kind of what I'm rooting for, because I want that division one to be have as bad a record as possible. So the NFL has to reevaluate their policies, like A, automatically get a home game, and B, should a division winner automatically get into the playoffs? Now I know they very much want a division to mean something and division winners get in the playoffs. And I guess I'm mostly okay with that. I think I would also be okay with a provision that says anything as long as they at least finish 8-8 or better. I mean that's a pretty low hurdle. If you finish 7-9 or worse, do we really want you in the playoffs, and do you really deserve to be in the playoffs? And at the very least, you definitely do not deserve to host a game.
Also true, so true, Mark. And I know part of that's coming out of the bitterness of you being a Colts fan and the Colts having to do that trip to San Diego a number of years back when they had a much better record than the Chargers. But it just seems odd. I mean, in what other sport does the team that is better and could have even proved it on the field of play had played the same team and won? What other sport do you have the team then that has lost and has the worst record actually hosting the game? It seems odd.
Very odd.
All right, well, that's enough on the NFC South. In fact, we probably should have had a moratorium on any NFC South talk for the rest of the season, but it's just too fun to poke fun at the NFC South. I'm actually pulling for Carolina now because I believe that would be a repeat winner, which has never happened, and it would be sort of symbolic that you and I would have won our underbet on the Panthers, and yet they won the division. The odds of that are minuscule.
Yeah, I thought about that today, actually. That would be kind of funny, especially with such a low number. You got 8.5, I got 8. And to be able to win the underbet on that and still have them make the playoffs would be crazy, because if someone told you before the season started that, oh, by the way, the Panthers will make the playoffs, we would never make that bet. If someone from the future came back and said, yes, the Panthers win the division, not only just make the playoffs, not even see it as a wild card, the Panthers win the division, then we would have put one penny on that bet. So it would be kind of funny.
In fact, you may have flipped it. If some person from the future did come back and tell you the Panthers are going to win the division, you might have said, well, then they're going to win more than 8 games. That's a give me. Oh, no, it's not.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, actually, that person from the future would cost us money. So.
Stupid people from the future always coming back and ruining our bets. When I get a hold of those futures, oh. But enough about the NFC South. I'm sure we'll touch on it again in a few weeks when hopefully the records have been solidified in something akin to 6-10 or 7-9. A few other interesting games occurred though that had playoff implications as well, but with teams with winning records. And in the AFC, that I wanted to start there and just touch on a few of the games that really cleared up the playoff picture. I thought you mentioned the Broncos and Bills. Well, with that loss, I kind of feel like the Bills are going to be out of it. They just haven't had enough big wins when they needed them. Their record isn't good enough, and they still have a game with the Patriots, I believe. That's not going to help them out any. The Dolphins losing at home to Baltimore also, I think, eliminates the Dolphins. We saw them stumble down the stretch last year. They're back in that mode, and losing to a team like Baltimore that was 7-5 with them, having that tiebreaker against them is not going to help. Cleveland, the Brian Hoyer experiment was great while it lasted. He got them to what potentially could be a 500 season. That's about all they can hope for. They're not going to make the playoffs. The Colts, as you said, with that last-second comeback, I think put a stake in the Cleveland playoff hopes right through their heart. And I think Cleveland now is going to be on the outside looking in. And it may be time for the Johnny Manziel era to officially begin. Assuming he doesn't go to any Cavalier basketball games this week. And then the Chiefs went out to Arizona, played a tight game. There's one controversial call on a fumble, Travis Kelce, late in the game that could have either let the Chiefs have a shot at a game-tying field goal or maybe a go-ahead touchdown. But be that as it may, they let Drew Stanton and the Cardinals beat them. So with that and being in the division they're in, Denver at the top and San Diego ahead of them, I just don't see how the Chiefs make the playoffs. So I think the AFC picture is clearing up a little. The Pittsburgh, Baltimore, San Diego, those teams are going to be fighting it out. Any thoughts from you? Am I wrong? Could one of these teams that actually lost this week that I just mentioned make a comeback?
No, I don't think so. I mean, they're all still mathematically alive, but before you mentioned Dolphins, Browns, Bills, and Chiefs, who are all 7-5. Win would have gotten them to 8-5, would have definitely kept them in contention. But at 7-6, and with the crowded playoff picture that's already there, it's said they're mathematically not, but I think they pretty much have to go finish out 3-0. I think we can pretty much run off those 4 teams. The Dolphins, kind of a mystery wrapped in the middle. They seem to win some games that you don't think they're going to, and then lose games that you think they're going to win. They had a prime opportunity at home against Baltimore, a team that is also 7-5. They can get a tiebreaker on them. They can move to 8-5 themselves, and a pretty good matchup as well. Baltimore, their secondary is in shambles for all the injuries. I know in a daily league they did this week, they took Tannehill and Wallace and Landry and kind of just loaded up on the Dolphins passing game, and definitely didn't lose that game the way they did by a couple touchdowns. Just kind of a disappointing performance for them. And then, Browns, they're done. I mean, they're 7-6. They're in last place in their division. Bills, they're in the same division as the Patriots. They're obviously going to have to get in as a wild card. They're done. And Chiefs as well. They're 7-6, but in third place in their division. So I think we can write off all 4 of those teams. And the AFC playoff pictures definitely looking a little bit clear. The Colts match number is 1. If they beat Houston this week, they're in. Or if they win any of their next 3 games for that matter, they'll punch the playoff spots. So they're in. New England's in. Denver's in, obviously. Cincinnati or Pittsburgh's going to be interesting. They start to play each other one more time. San Diego lost to New England, but at 8-5, they still have a decent chance. So we'll see how these next 3 weeks shape up. But the 4 teams we just mentioned, they're put.
Yeah, and you mentioned San Diego. They lose to New England. Now they get the unenviable task of hosting Peyton Manning after he didn't throw a touchdown pass for the first time in 40-some games. So I imagine he'll be wanting to rectify that quickly. So San Diego, while they are in a better position, sitting at 8-5, now that Baltimore and Pittsburgh have caught up, that could be a problem for them as well.
It could be. I think it was actually 51 straight games that Manning had thrown a touchdown, and he was, really close to Drew Brees' record. I think he was just 2 or 3 games shy, and based on his age, this was his one chance to, well, not his one chance, he's been playing for a long time, but this was his last chance to break that record, given his age now. If he played 2 more full seasons, that's only 32. 3 more seasons only gets him to 48, and I think the record is around 54 or something like that. So he would have to play, into a 4th season after this one. So that's, his one chance or his last final chance of that record's not gone.
Yeah, unfortunate for Peyton. A great performance by Buffalo's defense, apparently, in a losing effort that did see them eliminated probably from the playoff picture. So I think you're right on the AFC. On the NFC side, really the only team I think that was in contention that probably isn't anymore, it's near and dear to your heart. It's the San Francisco 49ers. They went across the bay, and apparently when you cross that Bay Bridge, you lose all your power. They were inept. They were one of the worst showings that a 49ers team probably has had in Oakland since Rich Gannon was quarterbacking Oakland. Or maybe since John Madden was coaching Oakland. So it was pretty embarrassing, and with that loss, I think you probably can safely write the Niners off from the playoff picture. The rest of the playoff picture, we'd already gone over this a few weeks ago, but with Green Bay and Detroit winning, with Seattle and Arizona winning, Philly and Dallas still both up at the top, those 6 teams, now that you knock the Niners out, those 6 are probably fighting for 5 playoff spots. And, of course, as we said, the NFC South, by some miracle, will have a playoff team as well.
Yeah, definitely done at 7-6, especially since they play at Seattle this weekend. And Seattle is looking really good. Their defense is back to being the best defense in the NFL. And San Francisco already just recently lost on Thanksgiving night to Seattle and only scored 3 points. I don't see any way that they go into Seattle and win. So San Francisco is done. And then, like you said, you have 6 teams: Seahawks, Cardinals, Lions, Packers, Cowboys, Eagles. 6 teams that have 9 wins or more. One of those teams is going to get left out at the sake of the crappy NFC South. And it's just going to be interesting to see who that team is. I think there's a decent chance it's going to be the Cowboys, which will be obviously a huge disappointment to their fans if they started 6-1. But just the way that the schedule was breaking, they have a huge game this coming week at Philadelphia. We'll get to later when we need the week 15 look ahead. If they win that, they have a good chance. But if they lose that game, and then they already lost at home recently to Philadelphia, then they're pretty much out. In the NFC North, there's an interesting situation. Detroit is one game behind Green Bay, but if they each win their next two games, which is quite possible, Week 17, the Lions play at Green Bay. That's basically for the division, because if Detroit wins that, they would both finish 12-4, but Detroit already beat Green Bay in Detroit, so they would have the tiebreaker. So Detroit is actually not only alive for the NFC North, but they're still alive for maybe getting a bye.
Yeah, I think they're the most overlooked team in the NFC right now. Obviously, everyone's talking about Seattle on the comeback trail, their defense playing like it did last year. People had been talking about Arizona, although I think a lot of people are discounting Arizona now. But then the Green Bay talk and the Philly-Dallas talk. Lost in all of that was the Detroit Lions are still sitting there, and as you said, win out, and they actually not only win the division, but likely at that point are getting a bye. I mean, that just sounds crazy, but that is the NFL today. That is what we love about the NFL and what we hate about the NFL if we're betting against certain outcomes.
Yeah, well, speaking of that, it may just be best to stay away. There's just so many weird, wacky situations. Like, you would never expect the Saints. They lose 3 in a row at home, and then they go on the road, which they traditionally struggle with, and then they win at Pittsburgh, a team that's also fighting for the playoff life. Then they come home. You think the home streak is going to end. They're playing a division opponent. They're tied for the division lead, and they lay a complete egg, score 10 points, get destroyed by 31. It's just San Francisco fighting for their playoff life, losing to a one-win Oakland team. Like, it's just week to week, so hard to figure out how some of these games are going to go.
Yeah. No, I would say I don't know what's worse, losing to a one-win Oakland team. That's got to be worse. I guess I'll answer my own question. Anytime you lose to a one-win Oakland team, that's got to be the worst. Beatable in your building. But the good news for the Saints, as we mentioned, they're in the NFC South. They're not out of it. San Francisco, you lose to Oakland, you're out of it. So, good recap of Week 14. It seems like the playoff picture is starting to clear up. We'll get to more of that later, I think, as we do our look ahead. But anything else on Week 14 that piqued your interest?
Just from a fantasy perspective, Week 14, every kind of fantasy league is different, but I think Week 14 tends to be a playoff week for most leagues. For a lot of leagues, it's the first week of the playoffs, and a lot of leagues have 13 weeks of the regular season, and then Week 14 being the first week of the playoffs. Depending on the league and how many teams make the playoffs, you may or may not have had a bye. But if you're one of the top teams in the league, and say your league has 4 teams make the playoffs and with no byes, and there were some just major fantasy duds this week. Peyton Manning didn't put up any, not only no touchdowns, but he had 2 interceptions and less than 200 yards passing. He had one of his worst games ever. Josh Gordon, if you rostered him all season to use him in the playoffs, he had 2 catches for 15 yards. Alfred Morris has had a decent season. I think he had 8 carries for 6 yards this week.
You hold into the 1-week playoff scenario with the head-to-head where you could dominate your league. Maybe you went 13-0 because you had such a good lineup. But all it takes is a Peyton Manning 6-point performance like he put up this week, and you're out of the playoffs after 1 week. And you were clearly the dominant team all season. So in our league, as you said, Mark, the 5 teams that made the playoffs, you're in the all-play format. Yeah, sure, that week maybe you get 0 or 1 wins, but as long as you make up that ground the week before or the weeks after, you still have a shot at winning this inaugural playoff season. And I'll say that my team started off a little shaky last week, turned it around a little better this week, and then assuming that my players continue performing, I'll be able to make up that ground rather quickly, because we've seen some of the teams that had a good first week in the playoffs are now in the second week not having as good of a week. So it'll bunch things up and it'll make it very exciting down the stretch. And I think that's what you want in the playoffs.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, we've seen some teams that last week put up, there was a team that last week put up 219 points, I think it was, And then this week, I think, around 130. So, so that's a 90-point difference week to week. So when you have, the head-to-head leagues where 1 week is so important, it's so variable. You might have a week where you just destroy, and you might have a week where you just do horrible. And if you have bad timing, or even if you have a good week but happen to play the team that blows up, and when your season is done, you should have a little bit more leeway, through the playoffs to have a chance to have, some good weeks and some bad weeks. So.
Well put and well designed, as we like to say. I think that's enough from our Week 14 recap, and obviously, as you say, some of the bad fantasy. If you play in an all-play format like Steel Scorpions, you just move on and hope that next week your players perform better and you get the wins. So with that, Mark, I want to move on to our other new segment that we started last week. We like to refer to it as On the Spot. One of us throws 3 questions out to the other and lets them riff on that just for a few moments, and then we'll this week I get to ask you 3 questions. So if you give some quick responses, then I'll ridicule your answers, and we'll move on from there, right?
Yeah, sounds good. I'm ready.
All right, well, I know you're ready for the ridicule, because similar to those who have listened in the past to the triplets conversation, some of the rookie wide receiver rankings, you've heard me ridicule Mark, because Mark usually deserves ridicule. At least in my mind.
We'll see.
That's right. In my mind, it's true. All right, well, my first question, it's a pretty simple one, straightforward. You should be able to answer this rather quickly. Who get the buys in the NFC and the AFC? We have 3 weeks to go. Who are my 1 and 2 seeds?
All right, that one is fairly easy. In the AFC, New England. They're 10-3 and Denver's 10-3, but New England has a tiebreaker. Their last 2 games are not that hard. I think they played Miami, they played Buffalo, and maybe the Jets. I think they might maybe finish with 3 division games. Anyway, they already had a tiebreaker on Denver. They had to have Denver also 10-3. They game up on anyone else in the AFC. The next closest is Indy with 9 wins, but Denver already has a tiebreaker there as well. So in the AFC, New England is your 1 seed, and Denver is your 2 seed. In the NFC, it's a little trickier. I'm going to say Green Bay is going to be the 1 seed. They're 10-3 now, which is tied with Arizona at 10-3, but Green Bay, their schedule for the last 2 games is fairly easy. And, I mentioned that Week 17 game a little bit earlier, but it is in Green Bay, where they are 7-0 at home this year. I see them beating Detroit in Week 17 when they need to lock up home field. So I'll give the Packers the number 1 seed. And for the 2 seed, Arizona has 10 wins, but they have some tough games remaining. Philadelphia and Dallas are both 9-4, but they play each other this week. I'm going to go ahead and say that Seattle, they're on a roll. They're at home this week against San Francisco. I'm going to say that they probably win out, and the Seahawks get the 2nd seed in the NFC.
Interesting. And I think that's the NFC, the rest of the playoff team's fear is that Seattle does move up and get that 2 seed. Because I think if anything, teams would not be afraid if Arizona held on to the 1 or the 2 seed going out there and playing Drew Stanton. And thus, Seattle would be forced into the 5 seed at that point. And I think everybody would be much happier facing Seattle when Seattle's on the road. So that'll be interesting if Seattle can creep up there, because they have the tiebreaker on Philly after this week's game. And so, even if Philly wins against Dallas and Seattle wins, it will be moving Seattle closer and closer to that 2 seed, assuming they beat Arizona when they play later. So good.
And if Seattle look at that 2 seed, you can envision an NFC Championship game of Seattle at Green Bay, which would be a repeat of the first game of the season, which was in Seattle. And in that game, Seattle looks really good. They pretty much destroyed Green Bay. I think they won by about 20. People were starting to question how good Green Bay was going to be. People said that Seattle was, on the road to repeat. And of course, the script flipped by week 5 when Green Bay was starting to really do well and Seattle was struggling. But we could end up getting back to those 2 teams playing each other to go to the Super Bowl.
Yes, indeed. All right. Well, I threw you the softball first. So now this one's a little more difficult, but since you're up in the Bay, I figure you'll have a good answer for me. Where's Jim Harbaugh going to be coaching next season?
Well, I can tell you what it probably won't be. He seems to be done in San Francisco. I think he's maybe ready to leave, and I definitely think the management is ready to look for someone else. He's always kind of butted heads with Trent Baalke, so I think he'll be looking for a way to get rid of him. He does still have 1 year left on his contract, though, so there might be a situation when they try to trade him. Peter King mentioned in his article today about, potential trades and draft picks and where he might be able to go and if he'd be willing to sign a contract extension. And you could certainly envision a few teams that might be willing to go for him. The Raiders, obviously, and then maybe the Jets. They're obviously going to be looking for a coach. There's been some speculation maybe Miami, the owner there tried to go for Harbaugh the first time a few years ago when he was coming out of Stanford, so he might still be interested. But one thing that I noticed over the weekend, which is very interesting, offshore betting books originally had Jim Harbaugh at 8-1 as the next coach at Michigan. Over the weekend, so much money poured in on Jim Harbaugh that the odds dropped from 8-1 to 2-1. So it seems like maybe somebody knows something. As we know, Jim Harbaugh played QB at Michigan. He's coached in college before. Maybe he wants to go back to his alma mater and return them to glory. And, Harbaugh's seems kind of a crazy type of guy, moves around a lot. I think his message kind of grows old over a number of years. And maybe he's willing to go back to college and return Michigan to power, maybe coach there for 4 or 5 years, and then he knows that he could easily get back in the pros at any point that he wants to. Any team would be willing to hire him. He's still fairly young, so he could be any number of teams. But based on that money coming in on Michigan and then having to drop the odds so much, and actually they pulled the bet. Once it got down to when they actually pulled it off the betting list, I'm going to go ahead and go on the limb and say Michigan.
Wow, so he'll be in Ann Arbor next year, according to Mark Heflin.
Well, who knows? Like I said, there's many possibilities, but if I had to pick one, that's going to be my guess for now.
Dun, 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 dun. That was breaking news from Mark Heflin. Jim Harbaugh will be in Ann Arbor. You can go place your bet at the sportsbook, except for they took it off the board, as you said, so maybe you can't go place your bet.
Exactly.
Well, bad timing then. All right, I think that's interesting. I mean, obviously, Jim Harbaugh, good coach. Maybe not the QB whisperer we thought he was with Colin Kaepernick, but I think he will have plenty of interest, as you said, from NFL teams and obviously Michigan in the college ranks. It'll be interesting to see if it plays out that way. I'm not in as much agreement that he'd go back to college, but if the pro jobs that are available to him, the teams that want to trade for him are Oakland and maybe the Jets, maybe Michigan's a better job. As sad as that sounds, Michigan might be a better job even in a rebuilding era than going to the Jets or the Raiders. The Miami one's interesting, as you said, because the owner down there tried to get him before, and you feel like they're only a few pieces away from being able to compete. They already have a QB who's doing pretty well. They have an offensive line that's starting to take shape. Their defense is pretty, formidable for the AFC. So maybe that would be more interesting to Jim Harbaugh. Well, we will just have to wait and see. But I take it from your comments that the odds of him staying in San Francisco came off the board as well.
I personally would put those odds at somewhere around 10% or less.
Wow. Bad luck for Jim. He brings the franchise back from the deathbed, gets them into 3 NFC championship games in a row, including 1 Super Bowl trip, and has a chance in that Super Bowl when they're at the 5-yard line to go in and get the win, and they don't get it. And a couple years later, he'll be out of San Francisco. And that's why the NFL is not for long. All right, well, that leads us to our third question, Mark. This one, a little more intricate, so I need you to pay close attention because it's a 2-parter. If you were Lovie Smith, would you tank the rest of the season?
Is there a second part, or am I answering this part first?
Well, you can answer that because the second part is, how would you do it? Because I'm assuming your answer is going to be, yes, you would tank the season.
I would, yes. There's 3 weeks left, and you're sitting at 2-11. You probably need a QB. McCown is not the long-term answer. Glennon, I think, is better than Lovie Smith thinks that he is, but again, he's okay. He's not a quote-unquote franchise QB. And, there are some decent QBs coming out in this draft. I don't know how many of them are going to be considered, top 5 material or future franchise QBs. Some people think that based on his talent, that Jameis Winston could be. However, based on his, not only his off-field shenanigans, but his just immaturity level that I see from him, I would not touch him as a QB. I would want my QB to be 10 times more mature than Winston is shown to be. And granted, he's young. He's probably 19, 20, and he can get more mature, but using a top 5 draft pick, it's just not worth the risk. Marcus Mariota, seen him play, very efficient, playing ridiculous numbers this year, 38 passing touchdowns against 2 interceptions. That's ridiculous. Plus another 14 on the ground, I believe. And he could be a franchise QB, and you're already 2-11. You're really close to getting the top pick. You could take Mariota. He could be a QB for the next dozen years. So yes, I would tank. As far as how to do it, it's definitely more difficult to tank in the NFL than it is the NBA, where you see it all the time. These phantom injuries. Oh, he's resting with a shin injury tonight. We're not playing our best player. And then the shin injury lasts for a week or two. But in the NFL, and especially in such a physical game, you can't tell guys to go out there and just, not compete. And as a head coach, you never want to send the signal of, we're not trying, because, as you mentioned before, too, NFL stands for not for long. A lot of those guys in that roster won't even be there the next year or the year after. So they're going out there for particularly probably to try to win, but I guess you just do it through play calling and sort of decision making, and maybe pull up Mike McCoy. Last night in the Chargers Patriots game, the Chargers were down 9 with I think 6 minutes to go or something. They had 4th and 4 at around midfield. You're down 2 scores. 6 minutes to go. 4th and 4 at midfield. How do you not go for it? Instead, they punt the ball away. When they punted it, as soon as they punted, the game was over. They were done. So that's their team going for a playoff spot. They were 8 and 4. So I guess if you're Lovie Smith, you do stuff like that. You just do some bad play calling and questionable decision making, where you don't go for things when you should, and just try to lose the game that way.
Yeah, the reason I used Lovie Smith in Tampa is because the weakness of schedule is the tiebreaker. Not strength of schedule, but the weakness of schedule. And since they're in the NFC South, I believe they'll have the weakest schedule of any 2-win team. So I would likely think they'd have the best chance of winning that tiebreaker and getting the number 1 overall pick if a couple teams end with 2 losses. So that would be that'd be interesting. And I agree with you. It's so much harder to tank in the NFL because the players have a short career and they're putting basically game film out there. Some of these guys will be free agents. They're going to work their butt off because they want to get a contract in the offseason. Probably not in Tampa. They want to go somewhere else and win. So they're going to try. So it's not like you can tell, as you said, you can't tell your players not to try. So everybody's going out there. They're trying to do their best. So I think you're right. The only way it would work is maybe you steal a page from Rex Ryan and you tell Josh McCown you're going to start at QB tonight and you're going to hand off 44 times. You're going to throw it 8. So I think if you did that, maybe you'd have a chance at losing out, because I don't think the run game in Tampa is very prosperous either. So you probably wouldn't get 44 runs because you probably only be getting about 1 yard a carry.
2 more interesting notes about that. So there are now 5 teams tied at 2-11. The Bucs, obviously, and then the Jets, Titans, Jags, and Raiders. 2 notes. The Titans and the Jets play each other this weekend, so one of those teams will get their 3rd win, and one of those teams will stay in contention for top 4 pick, maybe top 1. So
wait. They could tie.
I suppose they could. Maybe they'll tie it 0-0 or 3-3 because those offenses are pretty atrocious. But it'll be interesting to see how those coaches handle that game because, well, especially from the head coach perspective, Rex Ryan is not likely to be there next year. So what does he care what draft pick the Jets get? Versus Ken Whisenhunt, his first year in Tennessee, he knows most likely that he's going to be back there next year. So he could definitely use an infusion of talent. So he might want to, in his best interest, to lose that game. And then the Raiders, we mentioned how they beat the Niners, and of course they won or two because, Bay Area rivals, but they kind of screwed themselves because before that game, they were a one-man team and they were, in the number one draft spot. And now, I think they go from 1 to 5 because of all these teams. They have the toughest schedule, at least based on division. The other 3 teams in their division are all winning teams. The Chiefs, the Chargers, and the Broncos. So they definitely kind of hurt themselves from a draft standpoint with that win.
Yeah, trust the Raiders to get meaningless wins that not only knock them out of contention for the top overall pick, but move them back 4 or 5 picks. So that is Raiders football. Just win when it's not good for you. So nice job. So that was it. That was my 3 questions. I guess if I had a bonus question for you, it would be simply, were you happy / satisfied with the college football playoff bracket?
I was not. 1 and 2 were easy, obvious choices. Bama and Oregon, I think we all want to see that title game matchup, or at least most people. 3 and 4, I knew Florida State had to be included, or at least the committee would felt like they had to include them, but I've seen them play. They struggle to put away mediocre teams like Boston College and Florida. They struggle throughout the season. They fall behind. They get lucky. There's so many of these games that they could have easily lost along the way. They should have lost to Clemson in the one game that Winston was suspended. So at 13-0, and after they had beaten Georgia Tech, which again was a close game, a 2-point game, I knew they would be included. But as far as if I'm looking at the actual best teams in college football, I don't feel like they're on the top 4.
Well, hang on. They didn't lose. Every other team that you're going to mention is a better team than them. Had a bad Saturday where they lost. Also, you mentioned they fall behind, this and that. But if you look at some of the other metrics, like their strength of win actually was second in the country. I'm not sure how that happened, but it was. So somehow, and again, part of it, they don't lose any games, so they get credit for all their victories, whereas Alabama had a loss, and it was to a bad Mississippi team, it turns out. What was that, a 3-loss Mississippi team? At the time, we thought they would be good. Oregon had the loss. Luckily for them, it was only to Arizona, so their loss is better than anyone else's probably. And then you had Ohio State losing to Virginia Tech, Baylor losing to West Virginia. I'm going to say Florida State's one of the best 4 teams in the country. They deserve to be in. You go undefeated in a big Power 5 conference, no matter how you play, you're going to be in the playoffs, and you deserve to be in. Because here's the whole point of the playoff. This isn't the old BCS system. The flaw in the BCS system is Florida State would have been in the championship game, and we would have just seen in one game can they win it. They have to go out and beat 2 good teams to win the title. If they go out there and knock off Oregon and then knock off Alabama, hey, they deserve to be lifting the trophy at the end of the season.
I think there's almost 0% of that happening. I'm actually looking forward to maybe placing a wager on Oregon -9, or might be 9.5 now. I think it opened at 8.5. People are flooding to put money in on Oregon because they know that Oregon is going to crush Florida State. Not only do I think they will, I hope they will.
Right, I didn't say they would win that, but you have to agree, if they do beat Oregon and then beat Alabama, they deserve to be the champs.
For sure. I'll give them mad props if they somehow pull that off. But
and I don't think we'll have to give them mad props, so it'll be nice.
Yes. And I definitely know we have the playoffs this year because, like you said, under the BCS, there's almost no question that our title game would be Alabama versus Florida State, and Bama would crush them by, 30 points, and it'd be a boring title game. And I would feel, and most people would feel, and Oregon fans would feel like, hey, we're way, way better than Florida State. But yet, in that system, it would have been left out, and we would never know. At least now we have a better system. Still not perfect, but like I said, I knew 100% sure that we would see Florida State in the 4, but I don't necessarily feel that they deserve to be I understand they're at 13-0, but if you replace that and say that Wake Forest did that, with that same schedule, the same results, did they get in? I think we have a little bit of a brand name bias thing going on here.
Well, Wake Forest could never do that, but let's say it would. I mean, be more realistic. If it were Miami, who came into the season, no one thought much of them. Yes, they'd be in. North Carolina, maybe even Duke, coming off of last season's good performance. If Duke had run that schedule, because they would have started the season, I think Duke was ranked to start the season, right? They would have slowly moved.
Very fringe, maybe 24, 25.
I did think it was low 20s, so if that were the case, and they kept winning every week without any losses, including wins against, most likely Florida State in the championship game, plus Georgia Tech and the other teams, I do believe Duke would have made it, because people would have said, hey, that's 2 years in a row. Duke is now on the trend, and they deserve to be in. Now, maybe you would have had more debate with the Big 12 winner, but I can't see how you would argue that the Big 12 winner would be ahead of Florida State. No, whoever the Big 12 winner is, since they don't declare champion, that was a really good move by them. But also, those teams each had a loss, and the Big 12 wasn't great. So whether Florida State was impressive or not in all its games, those teams weren't impressive either. TCU almost lost to Kansas, and Kansas might only be better than Indiana in football. And Baylor lost to West Virginia, a West Virginia team that really has no business beating anyone in football this year. So I'm not sure how that argument that you're about to pull out is going to say they should have been ahead of Florida State.
Well, going back to the name brand thing, I mean, we'll never know, but I do feel that if this accomplishment had been done by a Wake Forest or a Virginia or an NC State or one of those lower level ACC teams, I just don't think it would have carried as much weight. We'll never know. Just my opinion. As for the number 4 seed, as we were watching the games and playing poker at WinStar on Saturday night, we were talking about this exact scenario. What if it's a conspiracy theory saying that, you know what, Ohio State is a brand name recognition, it's a big name program, Urban Meyer, you could just see that it was a possibility. And I made the argument, well, if it's, and this is kind of as the game is starting, and it's like, well, if they win, but if it's close, I don't see how they could jump TCU or Baylor. But when they won 59-0, both pretty much conceded, you know what, we're going to see Ohio State at number 4. Not only because of how thoroughly they dominated Wisconsin, but also because of the name brand recognition, and because it gave the committee an easy out. Now they didn't have to choose between Baylor and TCU. They didn't have to deal with the head-to-head issue, or which team is better, or which team is the champion of the Big 12. It gave them an easy out. So I saw it coming, but I wasn't happy with it.
But who would you have moved ahead of them? Because I will say the committee, I think, was always going to move Baylor ahead of TCU. So you would have then been screaming about the inequities there, as we discussed last week. But I believe in the final rankings, 5 was Baylor, 6 was TCU. I think that would have held even if Ohio State lost. Because as the committee kept saying all along, and this is why that Tuesday night thing was so ridiculous to even take place, they said they could only, every Tuesday, they were only evaluating what they had happened up to that point in time. They were not projecting forward. They didn't say, well, Baylor's going to get a chance to play Kansas State, and they'll beat them later. They could only look at the resumes as they were that day. And so Kansas State was a big win for TCU that Baylor didn't have until the last week of the season. And, I really think had Ohio State lost, Baylor would be in right now, not TCU.
Yeah, but, and as I mentioned on my Hep State session last week, I think I would put TCU in ahead of Baylor. I know that Baylor won head-to-head, but the game was at Baylor. Baylor won by 3. That's what you would expect if two teams were equal, if the home team would win by 3. So if they're equal based on that, we have to look further. And then if you look further and look at their schedule was almost identical, except TCU beat a good 8-4 Minnesota team, and Baylor played a 5-6 Buffalo team. Then when you dig into Buffalo's record, of their 5 wins, 2 of them were against FCS teams. That's right, 2. They had 2 wins against FCS teams. Their 3 wins against FBS teams were against teams that won a combined 10-26. So Buffalo, even though they have a 5-6 record, they did it against Gator. They're basically like a 2-10 team if they were in any other conference. Maybe 1-11. They're a bad team. And then if you look at margin of victory against their whole schedule, TCU performed better than Baylor by about 33%. They outscored the exact same opponents that Baylor played by a touchdown per game. So you can't just look at one game out of 12 and say, oh, I'm putting Baylor in because they won by 3 at home, even though they should have won by 3 at home because they're expected to because they're at home. Well, TCU didn't get a chance to play them at TCU. That's the way the football schedule works. But when you look at the other 9 games they had in common, TCU was better by 33%. How do you just ignore that?
Well, then I'm actually glad it worked out the way it did so that Ohio State is the 4, because you would have gone off on a huge rant when Baylor jumped TCU and took the 4 spot and made the playoff over TCU. But now we'll never know. I still think Baylor probably would have made it in ahead of them just because the committee seems to have been going in that direction, but it never came to pass. And so it was really easy for them at 5-6 to flip-flop, because who cares about 5-6, right? At the end of the day, 5-6 are losers.
Yeah, at 5-6 it didn't matter.
Yeah. Well, I think that was an interesting discussion on the college football bracket. And a bonus question for our on-the-spot session this week. Next week, Mark, it'll be you asking me 3 questions again. Hopefully I will answer them even better than you, which won't be hard since most of your answers were rubbish.
We shall see. I'll come up with some good ones.
All right. I look forward to that. And now let's move on to our second segment of the week, our recurring segment. And it is everyone's favorite, the often imitated, never duplicated, Hef's Hates. What do you hate this week?
All right. This week I hate unnecessary celebrations. And by unnecessary, I basically mean celebrating when your team is way behind. So I was watching Monday Night Football tonight, and Eric Weems scored a touchdown in the third quarter to make it 31-14. So they're down 31-7 at the time. This touchdown gets them a little closer, gets them within 17, but still, 17. So he scores to make it 31-14, and he jumps up and down and spikes the ball and is running around. I understand you can be happy, but I think it just makes you look like a fool when you just celebrate the crap out of a touchdown when you're still down by 17. You're like, how happy can you be? Dude, look at the scoreboard. Look up at the scoreboard. There's a big, huge scoreboard at every stadium. Look at it. Look up at it. You're down by 17. And it just seems to happen, every week. Sometimes it's even worse than this. This is down by 17. You see other scores when the team scores and they're still down by 30 and they're hooping hard. Like, what are you celebrating? Getting your ass kicked. I think the best example this year was Chicago Bears were playing New England, getting destroyed. Late in the fourth quarter, Lamar Houston sacked the QB. Not even Brady. Brady's not even in there at this point because the game is such a rout. He sacked Garoppolo and jumped up, did his happy sack dance, did the Aaron Rodgers discount double check, and injured himself out for the year. Something with his hip or ACL or something. And I almost thought it was karmic justice. Like, it's not about you. It's the ultimate team game. Why are you hooping and hollering and putting on the happy dance just for sacking the backup QB and you're still down by 40 points? That makes you look like a fool. So I hate that. I'm okay with celebrations if you're ahead or even if the score gets you, a tie or maybe even within a field goal or something like that in a close game. But when you are way behind and you score and jump up and down, I just think you look stupid. Personally, I like the celebrations that Barry Sanders used to do when he scored a touchdown. What did he do? Just hand the ball to the ref and go back to the sideline. Act like you've been there before. So that's this week's Hef's Hate.
I have a question on that. So the unnecessary celebration, does it also count on the team that is way ahead? So let's say we'll use the Ohio State game as an example. you score the touchdown that takes you from 52-0 to 59-0. Can you go crazy when you're doing that celebration, or at that point should you just be handing the ball to the ref and running off the field?
You probably should be, but at the same time, I'm okay with that. That one doesn't bother me nearly as much. You know, you're in a conference title game, and you know that the ass kicking that you're putting on, that you might put yourself into the playoff. So with something like that, I can definitely understand. You know, especially with like a college kid, and I'm okay with that.
Okay, well, what about if it's the New England Patriots? They're up big. You know, sometimes Brady gets pumped up and he's headbutting people. You're up 40 on the Bears, like you said. So let's say Brady had been in the game after that sack. Lamar Houston did his dance, hurt himself. Brady would have then gone for the jugular, thrown a touchdown pass, run down in the end zone, and headbutted Gronk. Would that have been okay?
It wouldn't look the best. You know, it would look a little unnecessary or, you know, maybe immature or something, but I wouldn't have as much of a problem with it. You know, if you're winning and you want to celebrate your big victory, that's fine. I'm okay with that. I hate the fact of when people celebrate when it's like, hey, buddy, look at the scoreboard. Your team is getting your ass kicked. Why are you celebrating? It's just, does not make sense.
Well, that wraps up another successful Hef's Hate, Mark, so thanks for that. Now let's move on to our feature that we started last week, Miller's Minute. And again, in the spirit of Christmas, I wanted to give out some advice on pop culture and maybe some gift-giving ideas. And what I wanted to touch on this week were two new albums that came out. And one, I think, was a rousing success, and one I was a little confused by, I won't lie. The two bands that I'm speaking of are Angels and Airwaves and Bastille. Two bands that I'm very fond of. I think they produce really quality music. The Bastille guys, most of you have probably heard Pompeii. Really good band. I highly recommend going out and checking out some of their other songs from Bad Blood. There are a number of good songs, even beyond the popular songs you may have heard on the radio, Flaws and Pompeii. Angels and Airwaves, a little lesser known. Some of the guys from Blink-182 jumped off, made a side project. Really high quality stuff. Their new album, The Dreamwalker, I will say, riveting, really well made. I think if you listen to the Wolfpack, Tunnels, really high quality, high produced music. And the lyrics, a little deeper than maybe some of the Blink-182 stuff you're used to, so I highly recommend that if you're looking for something a little different, alternative edge music. Throw that out there to one of your friends or family. Unfortunately, on the Bastille side, they have an album called Verses, Other People's Heartache, Part 3. It is a compilation album where they do covers and combos with other bands. So, for example, there's Bite Down with Bastille and Haim, and there's a song called Weapon with Bastille, Angel Haze, FUGZ, and Brock. So, lots of different people involved in some of these. Some become rap with Bastille, then adding a chorus to it. Just a little different than your usual Bastille stuff. It's good to see that they go out on a limb and try some different things. Wasn't a huge fan. One or two of the songs are okay, but for the most part, I was thinking, I can't wait for the next Bastille record to come out. So that is Miller's Minute. If you have the gifts still to buy on your list, I recommend Angels and Airwaves, The Dreamwalker, and if you're a big Bastille fan, I'd take a listen to Verses before I ran out and bought it. So Mark, I know you're a Bastille fan, so I recommend check the album on iTunes or something. Listen to some of the tracks before you purchase.
Yeah, I'm gonna see that exact advice. Give it a quick listen first, but yeah, I do like Bastille. I thought Bad Blood was a great album, so I'll listen to the new one and see if it's any good, and then I'll check out the Angels and Airwaves as well. See if I like it.
All right. And on a side note, I do want to mention to those that don't know, the video game industry has become very crazy. I'm sure you've all seen the commercials for Destiny, the crazy PlayStation game. It's kind of funny, the commercials, and you know, it's supposed to be the greatest game ever. I've not played it, so I will put that disclaimer out there. But what I wanted to point out is how out of touch some people in the music industry apparently are with the video game genre. Because, and this must be the video game makers, because the video game is advertising a song from Paul McCartney. I'm guessing that anyone that buys Destiny has very little chance of knowing who Paul McCartney is. And those few that do vaguely knew that he was some famous old guy. Maybe they saw him in the Super Bowl a few years ago. I would think that's not the demographic you're aiming for when you drop a song into a video game and then release it on iTunes. It's probably not Paul McCartney in Destiny. Maybe you could pick Angels and Airwaves for that next time. Just my 2 cents.
Yeah, that does not seem like the best combination or partnering.
Yes, Hope for the Future, Paul McCartney, new single from the video game Destiny. Very strange combination in my mind. Foo Fighters would have been a good choice. Just, hey, video game makers, just my 2 cents, maybe hit your demographic. And that's Miller's Minute for this week. And I apparently put a little of Hef's hate in at the end. I couldn't resist. And with that, we've wrapped up all of our great segments, and it's time to look ahead to Week 15. Now, Mark, this is usually the point where I make some comment about how I need a survivor pick from you because I'm still alive in my survivor pool. This week, I will say something more like, thanks for your recommendation to take San Francisco against Oakland last week. That really worked out well for me, and now that I've been eliminated and the $10,000 will be going to someone else, I'm very upset with you. But I will imagine some of our listeners may still be alive in their survivor pools. So why don't you give us a look ahead to Week 15 and maybe throw out a survivor pick or two?
All right. Well, as usual, I will first start with the lines of those double-digit favorites because, as you might imagine, those are probably it's at least the first place you should look because that tends to say that those teams are they're big favorites for a reason. They should win. There's 3 in Week 15. One is Raiders at the Chiefs. Chiefs are 10.5-point favorite. As we know from a couple weeks ago, the Raiders actually beat the Chiefs. Game was in Oakland. Chiefs should win at home, but as we talked about, they're probably pretty deflated. They've lost their last 2. They're basically out of the playoff race. So you have to wonder what the motivations are, but they're not mathematically limited to cover it out and still get in. So you have to think they'll be trying in this game that should be fairly safe. Another one is the Ravens at home. They're a 14-point favorite over the Jaguars. This one I would have no qualms in using. So if you haven't used Baltimore, I don't see any way that they lose at home to the Jaguars. The third double-digit spread this week is the Seahawks at home against the Niners. The rivalry game, usually try to not take division games, but in this case, the Niners are done. If you lose at Oakland, I don't see how you're going to go and win in Seattle. Seattle's on a bit of a hot streak. Their defense is playing at the top of its game. They're not going to lose this game. I don't know, so I feel pretty safe. If you're looking for one that's maybe a little more under the radar, I like the Panthers. They're a 6-point favorite. They're home this week. They're playing the Bucks. As we just talked about earlier, maybe the Bucks are looking at ways to lose or quote-unquote tank without actually look like you're tanking. They have incentive to get the number 1 pick, at least the coaching staff and management does. So you have to figure maybe they don't try as hard or do some bad play calling or not go for it on 4th down when they should or things like that. The Panthers, after their domination of the Saints this last week, are still barely alive in the playoff race. So I figure they'll be motivated. So as far as the underrated non-double-digit team that maybe haven't used it, I would say the Panthers.
So let me get this straight. You're recommending Oakland, or you are recommending to pick against Oakland with Kansas City, even though Oakland beat Kansas City just a couple weeks ago.
Well, no, it was one of the double-digit ones because I always cover all the double-digit ones. But I did say you have to worry a little bit. At Kansas City, the players might not be fully motivated because after having lost 2 in a row, they might feel deflated and feel like they're out of the playoff race. So. And
then you're recommending Seattle, who is at home, hard to beat at home, against San Francisco, but that's their big rival. If there is one game that San Francisco might get up for the rest of the season, wouldn't it be the Seattle game?
Yes. And they very well might get it for it because it is Seattle. But at the same time, if players are listening to the press and they feel like Harbaugh is done, maybe they've tuned him out. And in mind too, they know that they just played him 2 weeks ago. They lost 19-3. They had no offense. They put 3 points on the board. They were dominated. Seattle just went and won at Philadelphia. Seattle's playing really well right now. They always play really well at home. I just don't see the Niners going into Seattle in this game. Don't see it.
That seems crazy. Divisional and quality opponent. That's a team with a winning record still in San Francisco. But also, I think, to the point you made when you mentioned it, a lot of people probably used Seattle already this year. I mean, they came into the season as a Super Bowl favorite, so I'm guessing many people have already used Seattle. So it's probably not as easy to use at Week 15. The Panthers pick was interesting because I agree with you. We already saw the Panthers and the Bucs play. That's one of Carolina's wins. With Derek Anderson at quarterback, they won in Tampa. So you have to imagine they have a better chance at home, riding that high off a New Orleans game, to win with Cam Newton, don't you think?
Yes, yeah. I see Carolina winning that game. As we talked about a little bit earlier, one of the Bucs playing for at this point, they're eliminated from the division race. They're very much alive for the number 1 pick race. So you have to think that maybe management and coaching staff is looking towards Mariota and is less concerned with the Panthers.
Yeah, I think they're in a race with the Philadelphia 76ers right now for that top spot, so good for them. I believe they both have 1 win, so I'm kidding, Tampa. I know you have 2. I'm not.
And the Sixers now have 2.
Oh, did they win? I missed their second win.
Yeah, you missed it. They won in Detroit. They're now 2-17 or 18, something like that.
So embarrassed. I am so embarrassed, Philadelphia fans. I apologize. What about from a non-survivor look-ahead, Mark? What do you see in Week 15? Any games pique your interest? Anything with significant playoff implications other than teams that are sitting in spots right now need to win?
Yes, quite a few games are going to have some good playoff implications. On Thursday night, we have the Cardinals at the Rams. As we mentioned, the Cardinals, if they want to hold on to their division and maybe get a bye, they need to win this game. But it's going to be tough. The Rams are actually favored in this game. It's in St. Louis. I know I'll be rooting for the Rams. I put when I did my Panthers under bet in Vegas back in August, I did a couple of strange bets where they had this one casino where you could bet on a team finishing with exactly a certain number of wins. I think it paid 4-1 or 5-1. And I put a little bit of money on the Rams to finish with exactly 8 wins. They're 6-7, so if they win this game at home, they'll be 7-7. So I'll be looking to potentially cash that bet. The other one I did was the Vikings to finish with exactly 6 wins. And after beating the Jets yesterday, they're now sitting at 6-7. So I actually need them to lose out. So we'll see how that goes. But they play at Detroit this week, so they should be at least 6-8, and they'll have a chance to somehow miraculously win both of those. On Sunday, other games with playoff implications. Texans at the Colts. Texans need to win to stay alive. Colts need to win to wrap up the division. Steelers at the Falcons. Falcons starting 5-8 are first place. Steelers at 8-5, coming off a big win over the Bengals. Certainly in contention for the playoffs. Dolphins at the Patriots. Like we said, the Dolphins are pretty much out of it. It's more about the Patriots trying to win and hold on to the number 1 seed. Raiders at Chiefs, not much playoff implication. Packers at the Bills, more about the Packers trying to maintain their hold on getting the 1 seed in the NFC. And then, let's see, Bengals Browns. That has some playoff implications, especially for the Bengals. Broncos at the Chargers is a big game. And then the Sunday night game, 9-4 Cowboys at the 9-4 Eagles. That game's going to go a long way towards determining the winner of that division and the loser potentially not even making the playoffs.
Yeah, it's interesting. Typically, it's week 17 when the Cowboys have their make-or-break game. This year moved up a couple weeks. Maybe that'll bode well for them because I think it was the last 3 years in that week 17 game they failed. So maybe by having it in week 15, they get that win and suddenly they're on their way to the playoffs.
Could be. We'll see. It's going to be tough. They only lost recently at home to the Eagles on Thanksgiving Day. So to go to Philadelphia and win at their place at night, prime time. Going to be pretty tough.
I guess the only advantage they have is they did play again on Thursday, so they had the 10 days to prepare for Philly. Maybe that'll help them, maybe not. And Philly did have a tough game against Seattle, physical team. Yep. So for Cowboy fans out there, that's what you have to hope for. You have to hope Philly's a little beat up, a little shaken after the Seahawks game, and the Cowboys had the rest and the prep time to really make a game of it.
And if that defense is beat up, then maybe you just hand the ball to DeMarco Murray 30 times and let him control the clock.
That would be an interesting game to watch. You're right, on Sunday night. The Denver-San Diego game also very interesting. San Diego still looks like they're in a good playoff spot, but obviously losing to Denver after losing to New England would suddenly put them in much jeopardy if teams like Baltimore, who you mentioned plays Jacksonville, and Pittsburgh with, I believe, Atlanta, if those teams can get wins, it's going to make for an interesting last couple weeks for San Diego because they would suddenly probably be on the outside looking in.
Yeah, that's going to be a big game. Obviously, the Broncos need to win, stay on that pace for getting a bye, and if the Chargers lose that and fall to 8-6, then they're suddenly looking at needing to win their last couple games.
So it should be interesting in Week 15, and obviously the byes are still in play, as you mentioned, and many other implications with division winners. I think the first divisions can be wrapped up, and it's going to be the Patriots with a win and the Colts with a win can both wrap up their divisions in Week 15. Pretty early, but not the earliest we've seen in the last couple of years.
No.
All right, well, that's a good look ahead. And again, for survivor pools out there, Carolina seems to be an interesting play that you probably haven't used yet, or Baltimore, which you might not have used yet either. So a couple good picks there, Mark. I'm impressed.
And the one that I gave from last week, the non-double digit, the non-obvious one was the Vikings, which did come through, though it was definitely a little closer than I had expected having to go to overtime.
Yes, I guess at the end of the day, the outcome is all that matters, but boy, would you have made people sweat if they had taken the Vikings.
That's for sure.
All right, well, that wraps up the Week 15 look ahead, and I think that wraps up the podcast. Anything else you want to add before we sign off, Mark?
No, I think so. I think we pretty much covered everything.
Great, and I would just remind all our listeners, go out and check us out, steelscorpionsports.com, a better species of fantasy football. Go to our website, steelscorpionsports.com, and browse around. You can learn more about the all-play format, multipliers, and mulligans. You can check out our playoff format, as we discussed earlier, where we have the all-play format during the playoffs, so the one bad week doesn't kill you. And just learn more, I think, about a better way to play fantasy football. That's what Mark and I recommend. Look at joining us next year. Start off with one of our lower-level leagues, and then progress forward as you learn that this is probably the best way to play fantasy football. So with that, I will now head over to the baseball winter meetings here in San Diego and try and get myself a general manager job. So signing off from San Diego, Jeff Miller.
Signing off from San Jose, Mark Hudson.
Talk to you next week, sports fans.